Hey guys, welcome back to Christian Nerds Unite. Today, we're going to talk all about Wonder Woman 1984, and we'll get to that right after this. The beginning of a new year is when many people start thinking about their goals, and I'm no exception. The Goal Process 101 ebook has helped me clarify the best and most achievable goals for me, plus helped me set a plan in place to accomplish them. I mean, this podcast is just one of the results of using the Goal Process 101 ebook. Check it out at christiannerdsunite.com/goals. It helped me. I'm sure it can help you too. Now, back to the show. Welcome back. Hey, today we are going to talk all about Wonder Woman 1984. The movie came out December 25th, just a couple of weeks ago, and I'm super excited to talk to you about it. I think it is definitely a movie worth watching. If you're a DC fan, I think you'll really enjoy it. If you're a Wonder Woman fan, I think you really will enjoy it. Is it for everybody? Probably not. If you're super nitpicky about movies, you're going to find fault, and we're going to talk about some of those today. But before we do that, let's get to our scripture reading. We're going to start with John 4:21 through 24. "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and the worshipers must worship in the Spirit and in truth." And Psalm 25, 5 through 4. "Show me your ways, Lord. Teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth and teach me. For you are my God, my Savior, and my hope is in you all day long." Now, like I said, we're going to talk about Wonder Woman 1984. And you'll notice in both of those verses, we talked about truth. Truth is the key to the Wonder Woman 1984 movie. That is the theme they were going for. And we'll talk a little bit more about that truth as we go along. But let's start out with, who is Wonder Woman? Probably most of you are familiar with the DC comic character, but I want to talk to you a little bit about where she came from. Wonder Woman started in October 1941 in All-Star Comics number 8. That was her first appearance. And she was created by two people. One was a psychologist named William Moulton Marston, and the other is Harry Peter, an artist for DC. They got together, they created this character. Now, William Marston is a psychologist, and he used a lot of his psychology ideas that he was developing in the creation of this character. One of the things that he was a big fan of were feminist movement leaders. So he was a big fan of Margaret Sanger. Hence, he says that Wonder Woman was developed in part because of who Margaret Sanger is. Now, you may or may not agree with Margaret Sanger, but that's just something to know. William Marston had her in mind when Wonder Woman was created. Another thing is the lasso of truth. Now, most of us are familiar with the lasso of truth that Wonder Woman uses, and it's used pretty extensively in this film. That is kind of a spin on one of Marston's inventions. Marston invented one of the very first lie detectors. And so this lasso of truth that she had was kind of a spin on the idea that he wanted to create something that would not just force people to tell the truth like the lasso of truth, but rather be able to know when someone is telling the truth and when they're lying. Now, obviously, this movie is set in 1984, and it definitely has a great cast. Gal Gadot as Diana Prince, as the Wonder Woman character, is phenomenal. I thought she was a great choice when they announced her. She has that statuesque look. She's a great actor in her own right, and the accent that she has just kind of works for the character that they're creating. Chris Pine as Steve Trevor, a great actor, and I thought he did amazing in the first movie. He does really well in this movie as well. Then we've got Kristen Wiig as Barbara Minerva, or Cheetah, and as one of the lead bad guys. Kristen Wiig did amazing in this movie. I think she was definitely one of the highlights. She was able to take that character and really create two different feels. You feel that character transform from an unsure, awkward science nerd into the confident apex predator that she becomes as Cheetah. And Kristen Wiig does a great job showing that transformation. And then we've got Pedro Pascal of The Mandalorian fame, and he plays Maxwell Lorenzo, or Maxwell Lord, who is the other bad guy. And in this movie, he is kind of the big bad. And that's something we saw in the very first Wonder Woman movie. There was a bad guy, and then you found out, well, there's really a second bad guy. He's the big bad guy. This one, they didn't hide that he was the second bad guy and that he was the big bad as much as they did in the first movie. But it was kind of obvious that that was what they were going for. It's like, you're going to get interested in this character that's going to become the villain, but oh wait, there's somebody who's bigger and badder, and we're going to reveal that later. So that's something that was worked into both movies. Expect it in the next Wonder Woman movie whenever that comes out. I said earlier, truth is the theme of the movie. Now, you might remember the first movie and ask, well, what was the theme of the first movie? I definitely feel like the theme of the first movie was love, especially since the key moment at the end of the movie is when Steve Trevor finally tells Wonder Woman, I love you. It feels like love was always working along the way. It was always in the process in that movie, and that was kind of the overarching theme. Now, this movie, truth right up front, very first scene, we have a very young Diana, and we see her in a race against other much older Amazons, and they are competing, and she kind of cheats. Spoiler alert, by the way, we're going to have lots of spoilers in this movie, in this episode. So just be aware. But she kind of cheats. That's debatable. I wasn't sure she cheated, but that is the premise that they're going with, that she cheated, and that is not telling the truth. And so cheating is not telling the truth, and that was a problem. So right up front, we get the theme right out in the open. The other thing is the lasso of truth becomes almost its own character in this movie. It is a substantial part of what happens in the movie. It's used much more than it ever has been in any of the other movies. And it definitely is played up much more. Then we have another object that is almost its own character, and that is the Dream Stone. Now, in the movie, the Dream Stone, it's basically like a genie in a bottle. Hold it, make your wish, and your wish will come true. Now, in the comic books, it's a little bit different. We have in the comic books, we've got the Dream Stone. It's made by this character named Dream. It's used in the Sandman series. It shapes reality, but it's not exactly a wish stone. You can, if you have a dream, you can make that dream reality, but it's not exactly I wished for this and you get that thing. So it's definitely a different item, even though they use the same names. And I think that's something that DC is doing quite a bit. Marvel has done it some as well. I think DC is probably taking a little more liberties in Wonder Woman than in any of the previous movies, even. But in this instance, where we've got the Dreamstone is almost nothing like the original one. In the movie, it is definitely a wish maker. It is a wish machine. You wish on it and you get what you want. Now, there are consequences to that, and we'll talk about that later on in the podcast. Then we have Cheetah, Barbara Minerva. She's an archaeologist, and between her and the comic books, there is quite a bit of crossover. In the comic books, this is actually the third version of Cheetah. There were two versions of Cheetah before this Barbara Minerva version, and but this Cheetah is probably the most well-known version of Cheetah. So she appears in Wonder Woman number 7 from 1987. So this I think that's funny that this particular villain in the comics doesn't show up till 1987, but they set the movie in 1984. Why didn't they set it in 87? I don't know. It's interesting because the other bad guy also shows up in 1987 as his first appearance. So I think they wanted that kitsch, that feel of 1984 rather than 1987. But I digress there. So in the comics, she gets her powers from a ritual that happens in Africa. It wasn't her choice. So there we have a completely different idea of how she gets these powers, and I don't have a problem with that. In the movie, it's definitely she makes a wish and she starts getting these powers. In the ritual, it was never her, or in the comics, it was never her choice. She was given these powers against her will, and she actually holds a grudge against Wonder Woman because Wonder Woman was not able to save her. Now, in the movie, we have a jealousy. She wishes to be like Diana, and not knowing that Diana is Wonder Woman, she starts getting these powers. But she does it out of jealousy, and I think that works well for the movie. It definitely is not exactly the same story as the comics, but there is automatically some animosity, just like the comics. That the character has animosity outside of just being a bad guy. I think that's a great fit. But later on, then she finally gets the apex predator version of her powers, and she becomes the Cheetah for real. So in the movie, it's kind of a two-step process. She gets Diana's powers, then she becomes the Cheetah. So it's an unusual process, and I'm not sure I completely buy into why they did it or how they did it. We'll talk more about that in a few moments. Now let's look at another character, Maxwell Lord. Pedro Pascal playing Maxwell Lord does a fantastic job playing this character. In the comics, he shows up in Justice League number 1, from 1987, and he actually starts the Justice League International. So you think, well, that's a good thing. That's a heroic thing. Well, he starts Justice League International as a con in order to really conquer the world. Now, here's where we see some differences between the Maxwell Lord of the comics and the Maxwell Lord of the movie. In the comics, he was already a self-made man. He was very wealthy. He wanted this grandiose power. He wanted to take over the world. He already had, he was the real thing. In the movie, it's almost as though he's a shyster. He's not quite what he seems. He's not actually as impressive or as formidable as he likes to think himself to be. So there is definitely a difference there. The other thing is, in the movie, he gets his powers by becoming the Dreamstone. He makes the wish to become the Dreamstone. Now, in the comics, he actually has some kind of superpower. But rather than being able to give wishes, he's actually able to manipulate the minds of other people. Now, unfortunately, in the comic books, he develops a side effect, and he has a brain tumor, and this using his powers actually causes issues with the brain tumor and eventually causes him to die. Now, we do have a little bit of an analog in the movie here, because as he uses these powers, he sees an adverse reaction, and he starts losing his health. He often grabs his head once he's fulfilled a wish, and so there's something physical wrong with him as he's giving these wishes. So we've got some analog going on there. They are definitely not the same character. In fact, they're almost two entirely different characters because of the backstory early on and how they get their powers and what their powers are. I think the Maxwell Lord in the movie is actually pretty good. It's an enjoyable character, but we could have given him any name. He could have been a whole new character with a whole different name, and it would not have changed the story. It sounds like DC just wanted to use a name that existed, that happened to come out in the 80s, and somebody said, well, Maxwell Lord was a bad guy. He came out in the 80s. Let's use him. And they chose the name. But very little of his backstory really feels like it bled across into the movie. Then we have Steve Trevor, which gets really weird. So, once again, these are all spoiler alerts, guys. We have Steve Trevor, who is who comes back kind of in someone else's body, which is creepy and weird. It's just weird, and I'm just going to leave it at that. But this is actually canon as far as the comics are concerned. He actually does come back in the mid-70s as a different person. Instead of Steve Trevor, he's Steve Howard, and he has different hair, and he actually looks like a different person. But he is Steve Trevor inside there. So this actually really does fit right along with the comic story. Now, why he comes back is completely different, but the idea that he comes back in a different body, it's in there. It's still weird and creepy, and I don't like it, but it's a thing. So then, a returning person we have is Patty Jenkins as the director. I think she did a great job directing this movie for what she did. And I'm going to talk more about that a little bit later. I know I keep talking about it. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, but I'm going to put all of the kind of the issues I have with the film. I'm going to put them all into one section. But Patty Jenkins, I think she did a great job. She has a great eye for who Wonder Woman is and how she should be and how she should act. And I think that is something she really has a knack for. And I think she did a great job. Now, kudos to her. Right after this movie was opened, they greenlit Wonder Woman 3, and Patty Jenkins will be returning to direct. So I think that's a good thing. I like when they're able to keep the same director and have some continuity there. We hear that it's going to be set in the present day. We also hear that it somehow is going to be impacted by the pandemic as far as the story goes. We don't know what the story is exactly. The other big thing we don't know is we don't know when this is going to come out. Here's what we do know. Patty Jenkins is scheduled to produce or direct the Star Wars Rogue Squadron movie, which also doesn't have a date set yet. Now, what does that mean? Probably it means that she's going to have to complete Rogue Squadron before she can begin shooting on Wonder Woman 3. So my guess is we're 3 years out for Wonder Woman 3. It may be end of year 2023 at the earliest, and it could easily be later than that depending on how Rogue Squadron goes. So just to be aware, don't expect this movie to be coming out anytime soon, but I look forward to it. I think it'll be a good deal as long as we can keep Gal Gadot and we can keep Patty Jenkins as a director. I think it will be good. Let's talk about the 80s. Was it too 1980s? It definitely was 1980s. You watch this movie and it feels like the 80s, and I'm not just talking about the clothes. Mind you, the clothes were great. I grew up in the 80s. This movie was spot on. The shoulder pads for the girls, the popped collars, the parachute pants. It really was, it was like walking back through my junior high and high school years. It brought back lots of memories, and I thought it was brilliant. It also, to me, as far as that part goes, the setting, the costuming, it didn't feel like it completely took me out of the scene. There was one bit where there were people breakdancing, and it was kind of, this weird little scene that they threw in, and that one felt a little pushed, a little obvious, but it was okay. The Steve Trevor, which you may have seen this in the trailers, Trevor changing and choosing an outfit. I think that was a great scene. It's perfect, and it really fit. It fit a couple of different ways. Number one, the outfits were fantastic. The fanny pack was brilliant, and it felt like an 80s montage. It felt like stepping back into a movie from the 80s, and you just expect that kind of montage. Now, I say that kind of montage to bring up kind of my next point. It felt like it was shot like an 80s movie. Now, Patty Jenkins, great director. I think she's done amazing with the casting and the acting. I was not happy about this part of the film. The way it was shot, the way it was framed, the pacing, the coloring, the cuts. Why was I not excited about it? Because it felt like an 80s movie. Now, I think Patty Jenkins did it on purpose. I don't think it was a good choice. Personally, I don't think it was a good choice, but it's definitely the choice she decided to go with. If that's the way you want it to go, then great. But it feels like an 80s movie. It didn't feel like a modern movie set in the 80s. It felt like an 80s movie. And that kind of set me off when I was watching it. Now, there is something else. She all but says in a couple of tweets that the Wonder Woman 1984 is basically a love letter to Richard Donner's 1978 Superman. And it feels that way. The way it's colored, the way it's cut, the way it's framed, it just feels like an 80s movie. Now, one of the great things, 1980s excess. The 80s were over the top. Everything was over the top. The clothing, the parties, it just was. And they really did that well in this movie. They sold that idea really well. Maxwell Lord, he fit. He was every bit the 80s CEO, TV speaker guy. It was a perfect fit. It's kind of a joke halfway through the movie, or maybe the beginning of the third act. He says, "Oh, it's so odd. Everyone wanted a Porsche," and that definitely leads to the idea of this 1980s excess. They did a great job selling that. Another thing that definitely played into the 1980s was we got 2 or 3 references to the Cold War and nuclear war. And there is a scene where, we're turning the keys. We're about to launch the nuclear weapons. And that is, it's kind of an odd situation, but that is the kind of atmosphere we felt like we were living in the 80s. Now, the story felt a little muddled to me. There were too many stories. There were too many bad guys, in my opinion. One of the things I thought they didn't need, when I heard about this movie, I thought it was going to be a Wonder Woman versus Cheetah movie. And it didn't feel like that. We had the Maxwell Lord as the other bad guy, and I knew that was going to happen. I told my friends, I said, here's what's going to happen in this movie. We're going to get in there. We're going to find out there's one bad guy. And then all of a sudden we're going to find out there's this other bad guy. And this person is the bigger bad guy. Now, I wasn't sure which way that was going to go, but when I watched it, it was pretty obvious. Maxwell Lord is supposed to be the bad guy, and Cheetah is just shy of a sidekick, which I think is a fail. Then we have, the Steve Trevor for Wonder Woman. We had to have that love interest. Not every movie has to have a love interest. I'm just saying it. I'm going to go out there and say it. Not every movie has to have a love interest. Come on. It's a superhero movie. You don't have to have a love interest. Not every time. So, in my opinion, the movie didn't need Maxwell Lord. The movie did not need Steve Trevor. Now, the way they wrote the story, they kind of forced them in there, so they were required. But I think the movie could have been better and better written if they hadn't even been in the movie. They totally could have been two separate movies. You easily could have had a Cheetah movie and easily could have had a Maxwell Lord movie. And they both would have made sense. They both would have been brilliant. The other problem I have with Steve Trevor is Steve Trevor was not a character. He didn't have any major character growth throughout the movie. He was simply a plot device. He was a reason for Diana to make a wish. He was a reason for Diana to lose her powers. He was a reason for Diana to, give up her wish. That's it. He could have been, he could have been a figment of her imagination, and it could have worked just as well. He did not have any character growth in this movie, and I think that's a fail. Sorry, Chris Pine, that you were used as a plot device and not as an actual factual person. But that being said, I think the movie could have worked without him. This definitely could have been like the female empowerment movie that actually made sense, but they basically forced both of the women in this movie to have major male characters that they would be story dependent upon. Cheetah becomes story dependent on Maxwell Lord, and Wonder Woman becomes story dependent on Steve Trevor. It's a fail. It could have been a great female-led, female-focused film, and it just wasn't because of the way they wrote it. Now, the other thing that gets the story kind of weird is the rules of the Dreamstone seem pretty arbitrary. And I have a problem with this in a lot of fiction. When you set up a set of rules for something, stick to them. If this is going to be your rules, follow them. I'm not fond of the idea of, well, Superman has whatever powers we need Superman to have today so that we can tell the story we want to tell. No, I don't like that. Have him figure out how to solve the problem with the powers he has, even if they're not the right ones. That is an interesting story. So we have this Dreamstone, and the rules just seem pretty arbitrary. Steve Trevor says, it's a monkey's paw, which, if you're not familiar with the monkey's paw story, this was an interesting idea, but they didn't implement it well. Okay, so monkey's paw. The idea is this story where a person gets hold of a monkey's paw that's been cursed, but it allows the owner to have 3 wishes. And the problem is, when you make the wish, there is some harsh reality that's attached to the wish. Now, what do I mean? In the monkey's paw, the wish is always the bad thing that happens is always very closely tied to what the wish is. So, we've got a couple and their adult son. Their adult son is at work. The couple wishes for 200 pounds. And cash, says British story. They wish for 200 pounds. There is a knock on the door. A man brings them 200 pounds and informs them their son died at work that the company takes no responsibility, but because of the incident, they would like to give them 200 pounds for their grief. So the wish is highly tied in with the consequence. The next wish is, I wish my son was alive again. And there comes a creepy knock at the door 2 hours later, and the assumption is that, yes, your son has returned. Your son is probably now a zombified walking dead. And so it's, once again, closely tied. Their third wish is that he would go away or disappear. And that wish in itself is the negative thing. So, when we see Steve Trevor calls it a monkey's paw, because when you wish, something bad happens. However, the bad thing seems to be arbitrary. It's not very tied in with what they wished for. So Barbara wishes to be like Diana, and that one gets a little close to home. She becomes like Diana. She becomes an exciting, strong, powerful person, confident, but she supposedly loses her nice, carefree, fun self. But she really was just nerdy and socially awkward, and no one paid attention to her and no one saw her. So the only real negative she got was she kind of got a mean streak because she wished to be like Diana. And that doesn't feel like a direct connection, but it's close-ish. Now, then we have Diana who makes the wish. Her wish is for Steve Trevor to come back. Now, you can say, okay, that was pretty negative because he comes back in somebody else's body and that's totally weird. Yeah, but that's not actually the negative part. That's just how it happens. The negative is she starts losing her powers. Why does she lose her powers? That doesn't connect with Steve Trevor coming back. It would be, I want Steve Trevor back and he comes back as a zombie, that would be directly connected. I want him to come back, but he comes back as the bad guy. That would be directly connected. Her losing her powers throughout the movie doesn't really make sense. So, but that's the direction they went. So the other thing is Maxwell wishes to become the wish stone, the dream stone. Now he does. And it appears that his negative is that he starts losing his health kind of because he gives people wishes. And every time he wishes something for them or they wish something on him, then he loses some health. So that kind of works, but it still doesn't feel directly associated. Along with that, he gets negative health every time somebody wishes, but he seems to be able to just pick whatever bad thing he wants to happen. And he doesn't even always pick something bad to happen to somebody. So sometimes he picks something good for him that may have nothing to do with the person that wished. So it's just kind of odd and arbitrary. Then we have him basically giving Cheetah, not yet Cheetah, giving Cheetah the apex predator, her real cheetah powers. But it's unclear. Did Barbara get 2 wishes? Did she wish for the second one? Did he just give it to her based on someone else's wish for something unrelated? There's no clear connection. And it doesn't make sense for why she was given this second wish with the second set of powers, or even if it was a wish, or if he just used it arbitrarily because somebody else wished something. Super strange the way they did that. In my brain, it does not make sense. I'm going to watch the movie again, but I still don't think it'll make any sense. I think it would have been a better story if the wishes had more direct negative consequences. If you're going to set up rules and stick to them. Now, the other thing is, at the end of the movie, the idea of everyone renouncing their wish. What if they didn't? What if, a large group of people didn't renounce their wish? Did Barbara renounce her wish? Which wish did she renounce? Did she just lose her cheetah powers? Is she still as strong as Diana? Is she back to the same old Barbara she always was? That is super unclear. Can the cheetah come back in a later movie? I hope so. I think it could have been a great character, but I don't think she got a chance to develop because she had this other bad guy that took over her story. All of this is unclear in the movie. And, we just see a clip of her at the end, not with her cheetah body. So we don't know. But I don't like the idea of renounce your wish. Absolutely, there would be people who didn't renounce their wish. Would there be lots of people who did? Yes. Would everyone have renounced their wish? No. And how small a wish do you not have to renounce for there not to be major issues along the way? Okay, so another thing, this is when I'm going to talk about special effects. There were some really great effects. There were some awful effects. So the good. Themyscira, the island at the beginning, it's beautiful. It's gorgeous. The Amazons running on these platforms that just, they're all CGI. It looked amazing. It was so well done, so well choreographed. It just looked beautiful. Able to mix real scenery with CGI scenery. It worked so well. Another great bit of CGI is the wall that suddenly appears in the Middle East. It looks impressive. It looks really great. Some of the bad special effects, where she saves the kids in the middle of the road, it looks so bad. It's so badly done. The colors are off. It's it's green screen because it's green screen, but it looks like green screen. It's obvious that the stunt double is not even holding a real person, that the stunt double is holding a physical dummy. It doesn't fit. It sticks out like a sore thumb. Another thing is way too much slow motion in this movie. Oh my goodness, the amount of slow motion. I think we could have taken 15 minutes off this movie if you would have just cut the slow motion out. Didn't need it. Didn't need to be there, or at least not that much. Now, the good. So that's the good. That's the bad. How about the both? Cheetah, the design in general looks great. And some of the photos they had early on, she looks super impressive. But in the end, it's a little weird. They make the scene so dark that you can't really see her at all. And then even when you can, like her jumping from one place to the other, she loses weight. What I mean is, it's like gravity just becomes non-existent. And this is a key when you're creating a CGI character. They have to have heft. They have to hold weight. They have to feel physically heavy in the space for them to make sense. And Cheetah, at times, the jumps just seem to lilt. It's not like a cat jumping from one place to the other. It's like a balloon being pushed from one place to the other. Another one is the lasso of truth. Sometimes it looks amazing, especially in some of the spinning scenes. It looks fantastic. Other times it looks like a big yellow weird blob. You got to be consistent. This is something I think DC has had a major issue with. I don't know who they use for their CGI. I don't know if they farm that out to the lowest bidder, or if Warner Brothers has their own CGI group that does these effects. But the fact that it is so hit or miss in almost every DC movie, it's definitely a fail. Warner Brothers has to get this more consistent for their movies to look better. Now, other things. Wonder Woman can fly now. Now, I don't have a problem with that, honestly. In the 40s, she couldn't fly. In the 50s, she could ride the currents. She didn't really fly. She could just catch air. Now, that's kind of hinted at when Steve Trevor talks about how you fly. You ride the currents. So, question here is, does she actually fly in Wonder Woman 1984, or is she simply catching the currents? Now, in 1980s, after Crisis, she definitely could fly. She could straight up fly. So it is part of comic book canon. I don't have a problem with her flying. I don't have a problem with her catching the currents. Her swinging from a lightning bolt is a little weird. And I understand it's a comic book movie. We must all suspend belief at some point. But I think catching the lightning thing, it looks cool. It's kind of weird. Yeah, I'll live with it. But the fact that she did that makes me think she doesn't actually fly. She simply knows how to jump really well, kind of like the Hulk. The Hulk doesn't fly. He just propels himself long distances on jumps. I would say in the Wonder Woman 1984, she doesn't fly. She can propel herself long distances and is able to catch the currents and ride them well for long distances. Now, we got the invisible jet in there. It's just weird. It seems kind of forced. I get it. You're trying to get some fan service. It didn't need to happen. It was okay. I don't think the movie hurt for doing it. The bit about she only managed to make something invisible once and it was a coffee cup and she lost it, that's funny. That's good stuff. That is good comedy built into your movie. That's the kind of stuff I like to see. Turning the airplane invisible, I'm okay with it. It's fine. Now, I do question, why does the invisible jet, if it's just invisible, but it's still physically there, why is it no longer on radar? I don't know, but that's what we're going with. We're going with, if it's invisible, you can't see it with radar either. Biggest issue I have with Wonder Woman, and it's actually an issue with not just the Wonder Woman, but with the DC movie franchises. There is a big world building continuity issue. DC has got to hire someone. They've got to hire a Kevin Feige. Now, I'm not saying they hire Kevin Feige, but they need to have someone that says, this is the DC movie person. Everyone has to clear their story ideas with this person, and this person will give you information that you must use in your films to world build for our next project, world build for our next crossover. Doesn't have to be big, but you have to have some continuity. Major continuity issue here, as far as I'm concerned. In the Batman v Superman movie, Batman happens upon Wonder Woman, happens upon Diana, finds out she's, been alive for almost 100 years. But what doesn't happen is he doesn't know she was on TV to the world in 1984. That's a big continuity hole. And I think that's something that having a central person like a Kevin Feige would help fix. Those are those are my big concerns with the movie. Overall, it's a fun movie. It's a great watch. I think it's worth watching. I will definitely watch it again. Is it perfect? No, by no means is it perfect. Is it fun? Does it have a overall decent story? Yes, it has an overall decent story, but it gets kind of muddled in itself. I think it could have been a lot better and a lot cleaner if they'd have just left some things stand alone. Now, like I said, Wonder Woman 1984 is all about truth. And before we go, I do want to pray a quick blessing over you about truth. I think truth is something we really desperately need in our world today. May God, the Lord of heaven and earth, richly bless you and guide you in spirit and in truth. All right, guys, it was great to hang out with you today, and we'll see you next week.